Okay, we are now live with virtually connecting at the DigPed Institute 2018, and we have a variety of folks to talk with today. And I'm going to start out by introducing myself. I'm Nate Angel. I serve as the Marketing and External Communications Director for Hypothesis, the nonprofit that stewards open annotation technologies and practices. And I've got some folks here with me as virtual participants in this session that I'll ask to introduce themselves in a minute. But first, I want to turn the floor over to the folks that we have on site at DigPed and have them introduce themselves. Why don't you guys take it away?
Okay, I'm Karen Cangelosi.
I'm Chris Gilliard. I'm one of the instructors here at DigPed.
And I'm Jim Luke. I'm one of the students here at DigPed, listening to Chris, and I'm one of the on-site buddies.
Great. And is it true that we may have Bill and the other Chris join also, or are they?
We're supposed to. Yes, we're waiting with bated breath.
Not really sure.
Okay, so we may have some more on-site guests coming up soon. And then virtually here we have participating a couple of different folks. Vanessa, why don't you introduce yourself? Vanessa's on a rural internet connection, so it may be a little spotty. All right, I'm wondering if she maybe shouldn't. How about Sherry? Why don't you go ahead?
Hi, this is Sherry Spilitz. Hi, Chris. Good to see you.
How are you?
And Karen and Jim. I'm so glad to see you guys. Like, wow. Yes, I'm Sherry Spilitz from the American International School of Vienna, and I'm an elementary PE teacher. And I'm really curious to find out about what's going on in Chris and Bill's session. As I know a little bit of the origin story there. So yeah, so that's me.
And Fuji, why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll come back to Vanessa and see if she can get audio.
Okay, I'm Fuji Lazada. I'm Associate Dean of Faculty here at Davidson College, but I'm also an anthropologist. I have not attended any DPL, but I've followed many of you guys. I use Hypothesis, so I'm a fan.
Great. Well, now that we all know each other, and I know Vanessa has been having trouble with connection, so we'll probably see her pop back in, as well as some other folks who might come in off the wait list. You know, Sherry, you kind of kicked it off with some curiosity there. Maybe Chris would like to respond to that.
Well, I can only tell you what other people have been telling me, other folks in the track, which is that you know, it's as if Bill and I spend the day, like, you know, adding weight to their shoulders, which in a perverse kind of way I accept and embrace. I mean, Thursday and Friday we're going to maybe talk about some solutions. But, you know, we just spent a lot of time talking about kind of the state of the web, the state of EdTech, the state of, you know, surveillance and privacy with students and with people who use technology. There's a lot of reasons that I might say it's not good right now, but there's some stuff we could do, but we haven't started talking about that yet too much. So folks are needing a respite by cat videos and turtle videos. That's not a joke. That's true.
Yeah, that's not a joke. Yeah. So yeah, yesterday, a couple of points, we actually had to stop. And can we look at the cat videos or the dog pictures now? Because it was kind of intense.
Well, it sounds like it might have been. I'm kind of scared even just hearing about it. Can you give us a kind of snapshot of what kinds of things you've experienced in addition around the Institute? Or have you been so busy with that?
Oh no, you know, I mean, for me, I love this time of year. So I mean, for me, DigPed's kind of it's a good, depending on how you look at it, end of or beginning of, you know, the school year event. And it's you know, it's not really a conference in that, you know, oh, I went and listened to a couple people talk and maybe had a conversation or two and then went back home. It's more of a kind of get your hands dirty, and, you know, plot and scheme about what you're going to do about all the things that drive you crazy about your institution, or, you know, frankly, like how you're going to improve your pedagogy. And, you know, from a really selfish standpoint, it's an opportunity to get to see people that I don't get to see too often, or people I've just met, like Karen, you know, or people I don't get to see too often, like Laura or Tim Clark or Autumn. So it's great. I'm having a good time.
I ditto on all that, yeah. And it's also nice because there's the, you know, it breaks it up because like yesterday there was the hour and a quarter with workshops, and I went to the lightning talk. So, and it's good food.
Yeah, the food has been great.
We had a poutine bar at the opening reception. First time.
You guys, I have a question about the pace, because I mean, you're there for 5 days, right? You're assembled for 5 days, and while you're doing different things, you're in a track for, you know, four intense days, or even 5.
Four this time around.
Okay, so I'm wondering about.
Track takes about 3/4 of a day, and there's a little bit of other stuff in it.
Okay, but I'm just thinking, what's the pace like? I mean, how do you feel at the end of a day?
Like you, well, I never ran a marathon, so I can't say. You know, like I tested for a green belt or something. I mean, you know, like I rode 10 miles. I mean, like,
Exhausting.
Yeah, it's very exhausting.
But in a good way, like that mental exhaustion, because your head is full of different ideas and you've been working really hard. And it's emotional work for me.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. I think one of the reasons I'm finding it intense is, you know, unlike most conferences, you know, you really can't multitask. You know, I've been actually kind of stunned at how little. A matter of fact, about the only times I've been checking my phone was a critical issue back at the school, and most of the Slack and Twitter stuff about making the V-connecting sessions. And beyond that, I've been incommunicado. I just couldn't.
Fuji, do you want to? Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I was going to go off a different topic. Sorry, Sherry. Chris, you started off by saying there were issues in the EdTech industry, or I don't know if you said decline, or could you talk a little more about what you meant?
So a lot of the stuff I'm interested in is either about privacy or access, and so I've spent a lot of time talking about. I mean, it's my, and certainly I'm not the only person to say this or anything, but one of my strong assertions is I think that EdTech tends to take some of the worst practices in terms of consent or not having informed consent. They tend to take some of the worst practices of platforms like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn, adopt those in educational technologies, and do things with students and their data without fully informing students of, and asking permission, frankly, of what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, what they're going to do with it, how the students may benefit, whether or not the students want to participate. You know, and I think that the sort of rush for innovation that powers, that has powered our social media, it also powers a lot of ed tech in ways that I don't think are they're not student centered, right? So you can argue that there are a lot of benefits, but people usually start talking about the benefits to the institution and the time it'll save professors and things like that. And then later on, unfortunately, we start talking about how it may benefit students. Again, especially from a privacy and consent standpoint. So we've been talking a lot about that.
To clarify, I think part of the reason why like yesterday was intense, it's not because Chris is that bad a taskmaster, in cracking the whip over us, but it was intense because there's all this stuff about data that's been collected and privacy and stuff in EdTech. And I think quite a few of us have known for a few years, there's a lot of data being collected, and we knew about, they're doing ad tracking off of some websites, but unlike, Chris or Bill Fitzgerald, we weren't connecting the dots of what happens with some of that data. And it was running into a couple of stories, and I won't offer any names, but just as an example of stories where you start connecting one thing like, some data gets collected and it ends up in a student record. Well, because of then some other rule, the student record ends up in possession of police resource officers or campus police or something like that, which changes the rules. And then it gets accessed by ICE, and eventually, a story about a kid that gets deported because of an altercation, just one-on-one with another student when they were younger, that ended up in their records. And so it's kind of the realization of all that stuff that we knew was kind of morally, ethically going on, but in today's environment, it's real bad things are happening to real people. And it's kind of daunting. But, they keep telling us we're gonna pull up and we're gonna be able to fight. We're gonna learn tomorrow and Friday how to fight some of it. So
Right. Yeah, we spent 2 days telling them, all the scary stuff.
Hey, I noticed Rebecca got a chance to join us.
I did.
Sorry that it came so late. There was some brokenness on our side. Rebecca, do you want to introduce yourself? And maybe you had a question that you wanted Chris or the other on-site folks to talk about?
Sure. My name's Rebecca Davis, and I'm the Digital Learning Graduate Assistant at NC State in the College of Education. So I'm working on a PhD in Learning Design and Technology. And I just came in. I was given a workshop this morning in Raleigh, and I literally just sat down with the iPad and saw I had a link. So I don't even have a question. If you'll just let me listen for a little bit, then maybe I can catch up and see where you are.
Oh, nice to meet you, Rebecca.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, welcome. I was wondering, since, Chuck joined us, even though he was only going to watch, I wonder if he had thoughts on that last topic of conversation that Fuji brought up.
Hi, I'm Chuck Pearson. I'm just this guy.
Chuck!
Apparently people know me or something. It's not so much I got thoughts. It's just that it's the same. We're turning over the same exact issues we have been for a while, and it's just a little bit frustrating to actually be seeing the type of situation Jim describes come to fruition. And in knowing that we do have institutions that are very interested in what they can, making sure they have their information, they're doing their data gathering, they're making their operation as efficient as possible for their purposes, without any real thought of what implications there are for the individual student and care for that individual student. It's here, it's apparent, it's maddening. I don't think that Chris is going to cheer me up any.
No, I mean, and if sadly I'm sometimes tasked with being the person to give people hope, which would tell you how dire circumstances are.
He's not wrong.
Chris, you're our only hope.
But I mean, you know, and we talked about it in our tracks, right? There's engineer is not the right word to describe them, but it's the best term I'm coming up with right now. But inventor and theorist Joseph Weizenbaum, who talked about this idea of the inevitability of tech, and the problem with talking about it that way is that it absolves us of responsibility.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it does. I mean, we do have mountains to climb. You know, we do have a lot of forces allied against us, and most of them have way more money than we do. You know, we do have institutional momentum, and you know, and the needs of institutions who are trying to stay in business and retain students and things like that. And in a lot of ways, all those forces are against us. Like, that's true, right? I'm not going to lie about that. But you know, I mean, for just to take an example, I mean, a lot of people don't know about the EU's legislation on privacy. And so I was just giving a little talk at Michigan State a few weeks ago, and people said, well, you know, like, what can we do? Like, it seems so impossible, and like, we don't really have any laws in America to cover any of this stuff, which is true. But I mean, we can just look across the ocean to see that there are other places who do things, you know, that have flaws, but that are better than how we do them. And, you know, so, and there's ways big and small, right? There's things that instructional technologists can do. There's things that professors can do. There's things that administrators can do. Like, that whatever ability we have to exercise our power, whether it's like just to nudge people and say, well, maybe instead of doing the surveillance thing, like, maybe you could design better assessments, you know? I mean, and though that change is significant, but we have to be able to recognize what those things are and point out some of the problems with them before we can figure out how to dismantle them.
The solutions that we need that are going to allow our assessment to be better for our students don't have to be complicated, and they don't have to be surveilling. And saying that legibly and understandably is something that we don't do a whole lot of when we use tech in our teaching.
I think your point about the inevitability of it is an often used thing against any sort of force that we want to work against, that we hear these messages about, oh, there's nothing you can do, you're powerless, you're one person, it's inevitable, and that we have to remember when that message comes out that, in fact, the opposite is probably true.
Yeah.
Especially the louder that message is.
Yeah.
It's funny, you know, we started out by saying that we sort of hopeless. We feel hopeless, and you know, we can't rely on Chris to make us feel better. And yet, I already feel a little bit better.
Well, now this thought just popped in my head just a moment ago as Chris was talking about that, and maybe, you know, it is important that we take actions in this stuff, and it's not as gloom and doom as it might appear, because, you know, as an economist, all you have to do is shift at the margin, the relative, you know, the perception of the costs versus benefits. And I think right now, a lot of institutions and faculty and stuff look at tech as if it's relatively easy and simple and stuff like that. If we start raising the questions to the institution, like Chris and Bill were talking about this afternoon, and you start posing these questions, it starts looking like the surveillance approach starts becoming more problematic to them, just a little bit more troublesome and stuff like that. So maybe, you know, it changes the calculus and, you know, direct them off to something else.
But conversation that Chris, go Chris, go.
No, please, go ahead, Chuck.
Well, I was just going to call back conversation you and I have had about issues at my place and maybe issues at other places as well, that we do have this experience with the tech, and we can say things that are possible, and we can mention costs that come with certain types of tech that are more surveillance, do more surveillance. But the thing that doesn't make me feel better is the likelihood that we'll get listened to. Because very often, the fact that we do have expertise and we have used this stuff for a good while is not a thing that gets currency on our individual campuses. Run with that, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, and part of it is we have to have we have some really, I think, misguided notions of what cost is and what and people are very short-sighted about what is possible, you know. And I don't mean to call this person out, so I'm not going to identify them. But someone said the other day, well, we can't talk to every student, and I thought, well, yeah, we can, right? Like we actually can,
Yeah.
right? So, you know, and so the example I often use is, you know, there's all this tech. So if you have a class with 300 people, you know, there's tech where you can have bots who interact with the students, and you can have facial rec to, you know, take attendance and things like that, right? Well, that is a way to address the issue, you know. But then, I mean, what typically the failure of imagination is like, well, why do we have classes with 300 people? Like, why do we accept that as the thing at which we start, and then we have to like solve that, you know? And I mean, I understand there's economic and reasons, and like I get that, right? But that failure of imagination and that lack of institutional will to address some things in you know, to that someone would say, and I mean, it's a well-meaning person, good person, right? But that someone would say, well, we can't talk to every student, right? And I'm supposed to accept that. Like, I don't accept that. So,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
Right? We actually can. Like, we just have to decide that that's worth doing.
Hey, you know, and I don't want to bring this to a premature end, but I know you guys have to get to.
Yeah.
Do you want to bring it to a close now?
Yeah, that would kind of be useful for us to get down to the keynote.
Yeah.
You want to get good seats for that, I'm sure. Well, we really thank you for taking time out of what was probably a really grueling day, it sounds like, to join us here. And we appreciate that. And thanks also for the virtual participants. We can stick around and continue the conversation even after the on-site folks leave. So you don't have to go away if you still want to talk.
Okay.
Thanks.
Nate.
Good to meet you folks, and good to see
Bye, Chuck.
all the
Bye,
people I do
Sherry.
know.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. So now we're just here, all of us virtual folks, and we're still broadcasting. We can continue to have a formal recorded discussion, or we can also turn the broadcasting off and get unrecorded if we want. And just so you know, Rebecca, I did mute you just because we were getting some feedback through your machine. So if you want to talk, you have to unmute yourself.
I'd like other feedback on what, if anybody else has any other feedback they want to share with the live. I really value listening to Chris. Chris is somebody whose work on digital redlining is really critical. If you haven't come across stuff he's done previously on digital redlining, you really need to read what he does. It's something that's valid both for urban populations of the sort where Chris works, as well as rural populations where I work. I work in Greenville, Tennessee, right up there against the Tennessee-North Carolina state line. And there are issues of broadband access there. Not as prevalent as other places in the country, but there are issues, and we have to be aware of them. So.
Yeah, really valuable. I wish we could have heard his voice for longer. Well, maybe I'll end the broadcast here, and if we want to stick around and chat more as a group informally, we can do that. Okay, I'm going to shut her down. Thanks everybody for watching Virtually Connecting at DigPed 2018.